I'm Emily from the Bowen Branch Library. Welcome back to our middle grade reading book club. We are working our way through the Scorpio Races by Maggie Steifvater with permission from Scholastic. Thank you very much, Scholastic. I hope you've been enjoying our series so far. If you have been, if you've been listening to our videos regularly, make sure that you're using them to log in for our summer reading challenge. Check out our Detroit 313 summer reading challenge on our homepage, and you can totally use this to earn prizes. Today we're going to be reading chapter 44 through 48 of the Scorpio Races. Please make sure that you check the description box underneath the video for our discussion questions for this week. Hope you enjoy. Chapter 44. Puck. Kate, you do realize that you aren't at fault. Father Mooneyham sounds a little tired, but he always seems to sound that way to me when I go to confession. I smooth my hands over my smock. I felt badly coming to church in my trousers, but I wasn't about to ride Dove in a dress, so I put a smock on over my pants. I feel it's a fair compromise. But I feel guilty. I was the last one to hold his hand, and when I let go he was dead. But surely he would have died anyway. Maybe not, though. What if I'd stayed and held his hand? I won't ever know now. I'll always wonder. I stare at the brilliant stained glass window over the altar. The peculiarity of the confession booth allows me to see the rest of the building from my vantage point. Because St. Columba's apparently predates confession, or priests, or sin, the booth was added much later. The confessional is open to the rest of the church, and the curtain is only between the confessor and the priest. And the curtain is ridiculous not only because Father Mooneyham can just watch the penitent walk through the pews toward him, but also Father knows everyone's voices on the island, so even blind he'd know whose sin was whose. The only real benefit of the curtain is to allow you to pick your nose without a holy audience, something I'd seen Joseph Barringer take advantage of before. Now Father sounds a little cross. This sounds more like egotism to me, Kate. You are ascribing much power to what was, after all, only your hand. You're the one who says that God works through us. Maybe he wanted me to stay there and keep holding it. There's silence for a moment on the other side of the curtain. Finally, he says, not everyone's hands can always be the site of miracles. We would be afraid to touch anything. Did you feel called to stay by his side? No? Then put down your guilt. He makes it sound like something I can wrap in wax paper and leave by the door for Puffin. I slouch back in the chair and look at the ceiling of the church. I'm also very angry with my brother, I add. Anger's a sin, right? I remember, however, that God sometimes came over all righteously angry, and that was all right. I feel slightly righteous about my anger over Gabe's decision to leave the island, so perhaps it's not a sin after all. Why are you angry at him? I wipe a tear off my cheek. It's a very cunning tear because I didn't even feel it coming. Because he's leaving us behind, and not even for a good reason. Nothing I can change. Father Mooneyham says, Gabriel, because of course he knows which brother I meant now. He doesn't say anything for a few minutes, just lets me cry. Orange and blue light from the stained glass window finds its way through my hands cupped over my face. It's very quiet in the church. Finally, I wipe the sleeve of my shirt across my cheek. The curtain shivers slightly, and I see Father Mooneyham's hand offering a handkerchief. I use it to dry my face, and his hand withdraws. I can't tell you anything that he's said in here, Kate, and I don't know if it will make you feel any better to know that he has sat in that same chair where you sit now, and he has cried as well. I try, without success, to imagine Gabe crying. Even at our parents' burial he had looked dry-eyed into the hole in the ground, shivering in the wind, letting Finn and me lean against him and weep. Despite that, the image of him in this chair crying creeps into my head, and I can feel myself softening towards him. I'm resentful that this hypothetical Gabriel can work such magic on me. I say, but he doesn't even have to go. I will tell you one thing he said, Kate. He said that you don't need to ride in the races. Of course I do. We need the money. And the races are your answer to that problem. It's how you feel you can solve it. Gabe has a problem too, and leaving is how he feels he can solve it. It's a horribly wise way of looking at it, and it annoys me. Isn't there something holy about taking care of widows and orphans? Isn't he supposed to be taking care of us? But even as I say it, I remember him saying, I can't bear it. He had been taking care of us, from that dry-eyed funeral where he let us lean on him in our grief, to working late on the docks, to trying to spare us from Malvern. I suddenly feel very selfish to begrudge him his escape. I sigh. Why does it have to be leaving, though? Can't he come up with a different answer? Can't I change his mind? Father Mooneyham considers this. Leaving doesn't mean not coming back. It wouldn't hurt you to meditate on the story of the prodigal son. This is about as comforting as a cold brick when you're lonely. I stuff Father Mooneyham's handkerchief back under the curtain, and when he takes it, I scowl at the stained glass window over the altar. There are 13 red panes in the middle of it, and Mum or someone told me once that they were supposed to represent drops of Columba's blood. He was martyred here. It was back before the natives knew that confession and priests and sin were good for them, so they stabbed Columba and threw him off one of the western cliffs. Then his body washed up with the Kabelushka one October, and because it wasn't disgusting, even after being in the ocean for so long, he was sainted. I think his jawbone is still kept there behind the altar. This reminds me, suddenly, of how Gabe had decided when he was 15 that he was going to be a priest. He'd been absolutely no fun for about 2 weeks. It was Gabe who told me the story of Columba. I remember sitting in the pew with him then. His hair had been slicked back with water because he'd felt it added to his ethereal appearance. I felt a sudden pang of longing for that foolishly serious Gabe and the trusting and always ill-contented Puck that I'd been then. "Aren't you going to give me a penance, Father?" I asked. "Kate, you have yet to confess any sins to me." I cast my mind back over the past week. I considered taking the Lord's name on Monday. Well, not God. I thought about saying Jesus Christ. I also ate an entire orange without telling Finn because I knew he'd be annoyed. Father Mooneyham says, "Go home, Kate." I have been horrid. I just can't think of them right now. I don't want you to think otherwise. Will it make you feel better to say 2 Hail Marys and a Columba Creed? Yes, thank you. He absolves me. I feel absolved. As I get up, I see that someone is waiting in the pews on the opposite side of the church, waiting to confess. It's Annie, Dory Maud's youngest sister. Her lipstick is a little smeared, but it seems cruel to tell a blind woman that, so I don't say anything. I almost don't notice Elizabeth sitting at the end of the same pew with her hair pinned up to her head and her arms pinned across her chest. I can't decide which of them is confessing. Annie looks dreamy, but she always does because she can't see farther than 3 feet away. Elizabeth looks vaguely angry, but she always does because she can see farther than 3 feet away. "Puck," Elizabeth says. Annie says hello to me in her soft voice. "Where are you headed?" Elizabeth asks. I feel a little lighter. I have to return a jacket. Chapter 45. Puck. Even before I get down the twilight-darkened lane to the Malvern yard, I can see evidence of it, the fields and fields of horses, and I can smell it. Good horses making good manure from good hay. I reckon horse manure is a lot like a cat scratch. There's nothing too disagreeable about either of those things, so long as there's not too much of it and it's not too fresh. And there's nothing disagreeable about the grass hay manure scent of the Malvern yard. Because it's been a long day, and there's no reason to expect that it's not going to get longer, I allow myself the small pleasure of imagining that the sloping fields and glossy mares on either side of the lane are mine, and that I'm strolling pleasantly down to my own yard, filled with the buoyant contentedness that comes from the certainty of one's holdings, and the knowledge that dinner will have once been a cow. On the gallop to my left, there's a scrawny guy on a trotting thoroughbred gelding. He's got his stirrups strapped up short like a jockey, which I guess he is, and when he trots he looks like he's hovering over his mount instead of riding it. A man leans on the rail watching, and if I were a betting sort like Dory Maud, I'd put money that he isn't from Thisbe. He's wearing white shoes for starters, and I don't think there's a place on Thisbe that sells white shoes. Closer to the main building, another groom leads a dusky grey with a soaking coat back towards one of the pastures. The horse looks cleaner than I feel, and considerably better fed. Then, through the open stable doors, I glimpse a chestnut standing in cross ties in the aisle while a boy brushes it down. The evening light pours in around them and makes a purple copy of the horse and groom on the ground behind them. A whinny peals across the yard, and another horse replies from inside the barn. It's all very much like I expected a famous race yard to look like, and I feel a little funny about it. I'm not an ambitious person, I don't think, and it's not as if I ever spent any time daydreaming about having a farm of my own. And I generally have a pretty dim view of people who waste time sighing and moaning and rending their clothes about things that they don't have and never will, because Dad's religion was all about knowing the difference between need and want. But standing here looking into the heart of the Malvern yard, I feel a small fierce pang of sadness that I won't ever have a farm. I tried to decide if it would be worth being Benjamin Malvern, if it meant that I could live in a place like this. "Who are you looking for?" I scowled at my shadow before locating the voice. It's the groom with the just-bathed grey thoroughbred. Imagine a world where the horses get baths. How does a horse ever get dirty in a place like this? Stopped halfway across the yard. The grey shoves at his back, but he ignores him. Sean Kendrick? It feels strange to say it out loud. I hold up his jacket like it's an invitation. My heart taps lightly against my breastbone. "Where's Kendrick?" the groom calls to a man who's just come from one of the smaller buildings. They confer. I fidget. I didn't expect to be taken seriously. "Stable," the groom says. "Probably. Main stable." They don't ask me what I want with him, or tell me to go away, though they have that curious, helpful look about them, like they're waiting for me to do something. I just say thanks and let myself into the yard. I'm careful to close the gate as I found it, because I'm aware it's the worst crime on a farm to do otherwise. I pretend I can't feel the grooms looking after me as I step into the stable. It's hard to think of it as a stable, even with the obvious presence of horses in it, because it's awesome in the way that St. Columba's is. It has the same high ceiling, the carved stone, the carried sounds. The only thing that's missing is the afterthought confessional with the inadequate curtain. The stable reminds me, for some reason, of the great rock that all of the riders spilled their blood on. With effort, I draw my eyes down. I don't want to stare because the boy is still currying the chestnut in the aisle, and I don't want to be seen looking like Finn with his round-eyed, ogling face. Both boy and chestnut look clean and purposeful, and I feel grubby and mismatched in my pants and smock and hooded sweater. I point to where the cross-tie meets the wall, which is the universal way to ask, "Can I duck under this?" The groom nods. He wears the same sharp, curious expression as the others. I think that the interest is simply because I'm a stranger, until I'm past him and he says, "I think you've got a real head of hair on you to ride that mare of yours in the races." The way he says it, I think it's a compliment, but I'm not sure. "Thanks," I say, in case it is. "Do you know where Sean Kendrick is?" Again, I hold up his jacket. It feels very important that everyone know that I have a real purpose for seeking him out. The boy jerks his chin down the aisle past him, past endless, beautiful, shining stall doors with stone arches over the doors as if each stall is a shrine and the horses gods within them. I walk past them until I see a stall at the end with the pale white bars instead of iron ones and the unmistakable shape of the red stallion's head behind them. I step quietly up to the stall, and I think at first that Sean's not here. It's a concept that, for some reason, aggravates me to no end, and then I see him in the dim shadows near the floor of the stall, crouched around Corr's legs, wrapping them below the knee. He's very slow about it. He turns the wrap around Corr's leg once, then spits on his fingers and reaches up to touch Corr's body. Then he winds it once more before spitting again. All the while, Corr's neck is arched and he's looking out the small window of his stall. He has a view of bare rock with just a bit of sod clinging to the edges. It's a dreary view, I think, but he seems to enjoy looking at it well enough. I reckon it's better than the walls. For a moment, I just watch Sean wrap Corr's leg, watching how his shoulders move when they're not hidden by his jacket, how he tilts his head when he's involved in his work. He either hasn't noticed my arrival, or he's pretending that he hasn't, and either's fine by me. There's something rewarding about watching a job well done, or at least a job done with everything you've got. I try to put my fingers on how it is that Sean Kendrick seems so different to other people, what it is about him that makes him seem so intense and still at the same time, and I think, finally, that it's something about hesitation. Most people hesitate between steps, or pause, or are somehow uneven about the process, whether that process is wrapping a leg or eating a sandwich or just living life, but with Sean there's never a move he's not sure of, even if it means not moving at all. Corr turns his head to look at me with just his left eye, and the movement makes Sean look up. He doesn't say anything, and I hold his jacket up high enough that he can see it. I couldn't get all the blood out. Sean ducks back down, leaving me standing there with the jacket. I debate whether I'm supposed to leave it in front of the stall or wait for him to say something else, but before I can decide, Sean has finished the wrap and stood up to face me. His fingers press on the side of Corr's neck. "That's kind of you," he says. "I know," I reply. Dove's blanket didn't really need washing, but it got washed anyway since I had Sean's jacket to do as well. I worked at it until my fingers became wrinkled and my benevolence became irritation. "What are you doing?" "Wrapping his legs with seaweed." I've never heard of wrapping a horse's leg with seaweed, but Sean seems to be approaching it with great confidence, so clearly it must have some good purpose. I gesture with the jacket. "Do you want me to leave this somewhere?" I only ask because it's polite. I don't want him to say yes. I don't know what exactly it is I want him to say, only for it to be something that gives me an excuse to stay here watching him for a few more minutes. Admitting this to myself is a sharp blow to my pride, as, with the exception of my 6-year-old self's desire to marry Dr. Halsell, I'd always thought I was above being fascinated by anyone but myself. On the other side of the stall door, Sean looks up and down the aisle as if he's scouting for a place for me to hang the jacket, but then he frowns at me as if that wasn't what he was looking for at all. "I'm nearly done. Can you wait?" I try not to stare at where his hand rests on the red stallion's neck. It's a warning, the way his fingers lean into his skin, telling Corr to keep his distance, but it's a comfort as well, the way that I would touch Dove to remind her just that I'm there. The difference, though, is that Corr killed a man yesterday morning. I say, "I suppose I have 1 minute or two to put together." Sean does the sweep of his eyes that he does, the one that goes from my head to my toes and back again, and makes me feel that he's scanning the depths of my soul and teasing out my motivations and sins. It's worse than confession with Father Mooningham. At the end of it he says, "If you help, this will go faster." There's a little narrowing to his eyes at the end of that makes me understand that this is a test, whether or not I'm brave enough to go into the stall with Corr after yesterday morning, after I've had time to think about what happened. The thought of it makes my pulse trip. The question is not if I trust Corr. The question is if I trust Sean. What would helping look like? I answer, and Sean's face clears like a fair day over Scarmouth. He spits on his fingers again and pushes Corr toward the back wall of the stall to give me room to open the door. I stand inside the stall. He says, "Don't trust him." I narrow my eyes. "What about you?" Sean's expression doesn't change. "I won't be the one to harm you. Do you know how to wrap a leg?" "I was born wrapping legs," I say stiffly, because I'm insulted. "Must have been a challenging delivery," Sean notes, and points to a bucket against the wall. It's black as pitch inside. "That goes under the wrap. It has to be even." Keeping a watchful eye on Corr, I pick up the bucket. Make sure the seaweed lies flat. "Okay." "Leave an inch below the knee." "Okay." "It's got to be loose enough to put a finger in the top." "Sean Kendrick!" I say it emphatically enough that the stallion's ears prick toward me. I preferred when he didn't notice me. His attention reminds me of the black kabalushka that found Finn and me in the lean-to. Sean doesn't appear to be at all apologetic. "I think you'd better let me do it after all." "You're the one who had me in here in the first place," I say. "Now I think it's you who doesn't trust me." "It's not just you," he replies. I glower at him. "Well, I'll tell you what. I'll hold him and you wrap. That way when it's done wrong there's only yourself to slap. And take your jacket. I'm tired of holding it." Sean's look is appraising, as if he's trying to decide if I really mean it. Or maybe he's just trying to decide if I'm capable. "All right," he says. He holds a hand in front of Corr's face like a warning. We trade. With his other hand he takes his jacket, and I take the lead. He shrugs the jacket on, suddenly and magically becoming the Sean Kendrick I saw in the butcher shop as he does. He says, "The teeth are what to watch." My tone comes out unintentionally bitter. "I saw? That wasn't Corr," Sean says. "You have to know them. You only use what you need. You can't just hang every bell in Thisbe on every horse in the sea. They react differently. They aren't machines." "So you're saying David Prince would still be alive if you'd been on Corr?" But it's a question that we both already know the answer to, so I ask, "Why?" Sean ducks by Corr's leg, sliding his hand down it so the stallion knows he's there. "Don't you know when your mare is anxious?" "Of course I do. I've grown up on her back and by her side. I know when she's unhappy, sure as she knows when I am." I ask, "Did you unquit?" I glance up as the lights switch on in the barn, filling the stall with a yellow glow that doesn't quite reach the floor. Sean's much faster with the wrap now. He works steadily without stopping to spit, so that must have been something to keep Corr standing still while he had no one to hold him. Is there no one in this fancy barn who would hold Corr while Sean worked? All this time Corr's been standing sweet as a sheep, though his eyes are canny as a goat's. Sean doesn't look up when he replies, "Malvern told me I could buy Corr from him if I won." "Is that unquitting?" "Yes." "What about if you don't win?" Sean looks up at me. "What if you don't?" I don't want to answer, so instead I fire back, "What will you do if you win?" He's done with the rap, but he stays crouched by Corr's leg. "With my savings and my part of the purse I'll buy Corr, and I'll move back to my father's house out on the Western Rock and let only the wind change my direction." Perhaps because I've only just discovered the formidable beauty of the Malvern stables, I'm incredulous. "Wouldn't you miss all this?" Now he looks up at me, and from this angle it looks like someone has smeared charcoal beneath the skin under his eyes. What's there to miss? This was never mine to miss. This makes him heave a deep sigh, which seems like the closest thing to a confession I've heard from him, and then he pushes to his feet. "What about you, Kate Connolly?" "Puck Connolly." The way he says it, I feel certain he misremembered intentionally, because he liked the weight of the words when he said my name twice, and that makes me feel warm and nervous and agreeable. "What about me?" He trades me again, the bucket for the lead, and I step back. "What will you do if you win the Scorpio Races?" I look into the bucket. "Oh, I'll buy 14 dresses and build a road and name it after myself and try one of everything at Paulson's." Though I don't quite look up, I can still feel his gaze on me. It's a heavy thing, this look of his. He says, "What's the real answer?" But when I try to think of a real answer, it reminds me of Father Mooningham saying that Gabe had sat in the confessional and cried, and it makes me think of how, no matter what happens in the races, the best option still has Gabe sailing away in a boat. So I snap, "Do you think I just turned my secrets out for everyone?" He is unfazed. "I didn't know they were secrets," he says, "or I wouldn't have asked. It makes me feel ungenerous, since he'd answered so honestly. I'm sorry, I say. My mother always said that I was born out of a bottle of vinegar instead of born from a womb, and that she and my father bathed me in sugar for 3 days to wash it off. I try to behave, but I always go back to the vinegar. When Dad was in one of his rare fanciful moods, he told guests that the pixies left me on the doorstep because I bit their fingers too often. My favourite was always when Mum said that before I was born it rained for 7 days and 7 nights solid, and when she went out in the yard to ask the sky what it was weeping for, I dropped out of the clouds at her feet and the sun came out. I always liked the idea of being such a bother that I affected even the weather. Sean says, "Don't apologise. I was being too free." And now I feel even worse, because that wasn't what I meant at all. Beside Sean, Corr abruptly shifts his weight, and the motion of his head seems more lupine than equine. Something in his expression makes Sean spit on his fingers and press Corr toward the wall again. I'm afraid that he's going to ask me to leave the stall now, so I ask hurriedly, "What is the spitting? I saw you do it before." I don't have to fabricate interest. It appeals to a part of me that has been repressed by years of studious effort on the part of the adults in my life. Sean looks at his fingers as if he means to spit on them to demonstrate. Then he simply opens and closes them. He studies Corr as he thinks, as if Corr will somehow provide a way for him to frame his answer. It's spit, salt, me. It's a part of me. It's a way for me to be somewhere when the rest of me can't be. I remember how Corr stilled for Sean as he would for no one else on the beach, how the scent of Sean on his shirt calmed him when nothing else would. I reply, "Something tells me my spit wouldn't mean as much to Corr as yours would." There's a long pause before Sean speaks. He says, "Maybe not yet. Yet. I don't think I've ever heard such a fine word before." I say, "And the whispering? What do you tell him?" Sean stands at Corr's shoulder, and for the first time he smiles at me. It's the smallest of things, and it's not amusement or humour, so I'm not sure what it means. He's younger when he has it on, easier to look at, which is maybe why he avoids it. He leans his cheek against Corr's withers and says what he needs to hear. One of Corr's ears flicks back to him. The other stays trained on me. I don't want to look away from Sean leaning again on Corr. There's something about it, this massive red giant that killed a man, and slight, dark Sean Kendrick beside him as if they are friends, that fascinates and terrifies me. Sean watches me watching him and then says, "Are you afraid of him?" I don't want to say yes, because I'm not afraid of him right now when he looks more like a horse and less like a fiend, but I don't want to say no either, because yesterday morning on the beach I was horrified and terrified. I would just say no anyway, but I feel certain that Sean Kendrick with his lacerating gaze would see right through me to the vagaries behind that no. So instead I reply, "You said you didn't trust him." I don't trust the ocean either. It would kill me as soon as not. Doesn't mean I'm afraid of it. I frown at him. I'm thinking again of that image of Sean crouched tightly on top of the red stallion, galloping bareback on the tops of the cliffs. Of Sean unable to watch Mutt Malvern on Corr's back. For once I don't look away from his narrow gaze. But you aren't just unafraid. You love them, don't you? You love Corr. Sean flinches as if I've startled him. He's quiet so long that I notice the sounds of the yard outside the stable, the calls and whinnies and water running and doors shutting. Then he says, "And you love the island? Tell me how it's any different." As soon as he says it, I know that I can't counter his argument. Of course, it's true the island would just as soon see me dead as alive, and it's also true that I love it despite that. Possibly because of it. "Don't think I'd like to argue with you," I say. "I think it would be a very dissatisfying pastime." He looks out the window as if in reply, and he studies that hopeless landscape so intently that I look too, certain he must have seen something. It's only because I've lived with brothers that I realize after a moment that he's not looking outside, but rather inside, wrestling with something inside himself, and there's nothing for it but to wait. Finally he asks, "Do you want to ride him?" I don't think I've heard him right. I don't want to say "excuse me," because if I did hear him right, it sounds like I don't want to, and if I've heard him wrong, it sounds like I wasn't paying attention. He adds, "I'll ride with you." My mind is a jumble of thoughts, that I watched this horse rip a man's throat out only a day ago, that he's the fastest horse on the island, that I'll dishonour my parents' death, that I'm afraid that I'll love it, that I'm afraid I'll be afraid, that I want Sean Kendrick to think well of me, that I need to be able to live with myself at night when I'm lying in bed and thinking about what I've done that day. "On the cliffs," I say. "The tide is high, so it would have to be. I imagine the other Kabalushka he rode throwing herself over the edge. He watches me for a long time. You can say no. But he knows I won't." Chapter 46. Sean. When I was 8, the October wind brought a storm that twisted the sea around Thisbe. Days before the rain came, the clouds hugged the horizon and the ocean crawled high up on the rocks, hungry for the warmth of our homes. My mother cried and covered her eyes when the shingles of the roof chattered like teeth. I heard her tears against the windows even before the skies clouded. This was before spring came, before the next October came, before the tide took her to the mainland and gave my father Corr instead. In the dark, my father opened the door and led me out of the cottage and into the briny night. The moon was round and full and brave above us. The beach my father led me to was flat and glass-like, the wet sand reflecting the moon. The ocean stretched out and stretched out and stretched out, and my heart hurt to see it. My father took me to a cleft in the cliff. We had to climb over ever larger rocks to reach the end, a hollow in the cliffs where a long ago furious sea had thrown a lovely dead-white conch shell and a man's leg bone. Here it was dark, and the moon couldn't see us, although we could see the moon. The beach spread down below us. I don't remember my father telling me to be quiet, but I was. The moon moved across the sky as the tide slowly crept in. The surf was storm-maddened and frothy. They came in with the tide. The moon illuminated long lines of froth as the waves gathered and gathered and gathered offshore, and when they finally broke on the sand, the Kabelushka tumbled onto the shore with them. The horses pulled their heads up with effort, trying to break free from the salt water. As they climbed from the ocean, my father gripped my arm with a pale-knuckled hand. "Be still," he told me. But I was already still. The Kabelushka plunged down the sand, skirmishing and bucking, shaking the sea foam out of their manes and the Atlantic from their hooves. They screamed back to the others still in the water, high wails that raised the hair on my arms. They were swift and deadly, savage and beautiful. The horses were giants, at once the ocean and the island, and that was when I loved them. Now Puck and I walk my stallion out to the cliffs under a deep blue sky. Her expression is fierce and uncompromising, full of the intrepid bravery of a small boat in an uncertain sea. Above us is the same full moon that lit the ocean all those nights ago. I remember my father's white-knuckled hand holding my arm. "Be still." She stands beside Corr, looking up at him. I want her to love him. Chapter 47. Puck. Out here on the cliffs, the red stallion moves constantly. His nostrils flare to catch the sea wind that lifts my hair from my forehead. When I was younger and I'd ride Dove bareback and bridleless and filthy in her paddock, I'd use the fence or a rock outcropping to scramble onto her back. Today, with Corr, it's no different, only the outcropping we stand by is taller than the ones I'd need for Dove. Sean manoeuvres him into place and says, "That's as still as he's going to get." My heart is already galloping. I cannot believe that I'm really about to get onto a Kabelushka, and not just any Kabelushka, but the one whose name is on the top of the board at the butcher's, the one who has won the Scorpio Races 4 times, the one who tore out David Prince's throat yesterday morning. I grab a fistful of his mane and struggle to keep from being tugged off the rock as he dances. Finally, I pull myself on his back, clutching his mane with both hands like a little kid. Sean says, "I'm going to give you the reins now. I'll need you to hold him while I get on, or you'll be all on your own. Can I trust you to hold him?" The way he says it makes me realize just how much he's risking right now, putting me on his horse, giving me the reins. Could others hold him? His face remains the same. "There are no others. You're the only one." I swallow. I can hold him. Sean drags his foot in a semicircle before Corr and spits in it. Then he quickly loops the reins over Corr's head and hands them to me. If I had never seen or touched Corr, this would be the moment when I realize just how large he is, how unlike Dove. Through the reins I can somehow feel how powerful he is. They're spiderwebs anchoring a ship. He tries my hold, and I try him back. I don't want him to try harder. Sean settles swiftly behind me, and I'm startled by the sudden closeness of him, my back suddenly warm against his chest, the press of his hips against me. I turn to ask him a question, and he jerks his face away from the proximity to mine. I say, "Oh, sorry." "Are you all right with the reins?" He's all black and white in this light, his eyes hidden in shadow beneath his eyebrows. I nod, but Corr won't go forward. He only backs, shaking his head. When pushed, he lifts his front feet a little off the ground, not rearing, but warning me. Sean says something that's lost to the wind. "What?" "My circle," Sean says right into my ear, his breath warm. I shiver hard, though the wind is no colder than before. "You won't want to cross it. Go around." As soon as we're free of the circle, Corr is like a bird in a gale. I can't tell if he's walking or trotting, only that we're moving and that all directions feel possible. When Corr jerks to the side, I press my legs into his sides to straighten him, and Sean's arms go around me to grab his mane. I know that Sean only did it to steady himself, not me, but suddenly I feel more grounded. I turn my face, and again he moves his head to give me room, but I don't know what I was going to say. "What?" His mouth makes the shape of the words, although I don't properly hear it. Is it? He starts to withdraw his arms, and I shake my head. My hair whips across my forehead, and he winces as it lashes him too. He says something again, and once more the wind steals his voice. When Sean sees that I didn't hear him, he leans forward to my ear again. I can't think of the last time I was so close to another person. I can feel the rise and fall of his chest when he breathes. His words are warm in my ear. Are you afraid? I don't know what I am right now, but it is not afraid. I shake my head. Sean takes my ponytail in his hand, his fingers touching my neck, and then he tucks my hair into my collar, out of the reach of the wind. He avoids my gaze. Then he links his arms back around me and pushes his calf into Corr's side. Corr springs into the air. When Dove moves up from a canter to a gallop, sometimes the only way I can tell the difference is because her hooves pound a 4-time rhythm instead of a 3. But when Corr moves into a gallop, it's as if it's a gait that has just been invented, something so much faster than all the others that it should be called something else. The wind roars savagely across my ears. There are uneven stones standing watch in the field, but they're nothing to Corr. He barely lifts his knees and they're behind us. Each stride feels like it takes us a mile. We'll run out of island before he runs out of speed. We're giants on his back. Sean says into my ear, ask him for more. And when I squeeze my legs around him, Corr bounds forward again, as if we've been merely straggling before. I can't believe that any of the horses on the beach are faster than this. I can't believe there's a horse in the world faster than this. And this is with 2 people on him. With only Sean during the race, how can he lose? We are flying. Corr's skin is hot against my legs, clingy somehow, like when the current pushes your toes deeper into the sand. I feel his pulse in my pulse, his energy in mine, and I know this is the mysterious, terrifying power of the Kobelushka. We all know it, how it seizes you and confuses you, and then you are in the water before you know it. But Sean leans forward, hard against me in order to reach Corr's mane, and ties knots in it. 3, then 7, then 3 again. I try to focus on what he's doing instead of his body pressed against mine, his cheek against my hair. I lay the rein against Corr's neck, and he gallops to the left, away from the line of the cliffs. Sean is still tightly against me, the fingers of one hand pressing into one of Corr's veins while the other grips his mane. The magic becomes a dull hum through me. My body warns me of the danger of this Kobelushka beneath me, but at the same time it screams that it's alive, alive, alive. We wheel back the way we came. I keep waiting for Corr to flag, to show some signs of tiring, but there's nothing but the pounding of his hooves across the turf, the snort of his breath around the bit, the wind blowing across my ears. The island spools out beneath the moonlight. We gallop parallel to the cliff edge, and beyond it I see a flock of white birds keeping pace with us. Gulls, perhaps, soaring and gliding on air currents that send them violently upward as they get close to the rocks. This is Thisbe, I think. This is the island I love. I suddenly feel I know everything about the island and everything about me all at the same time, only I know that it will go away as soon as we stop. We are back where we began, and I reluctantly slow Corr. My heart is crashing in my ears, galloping even though Corr has stopped. I slide off and step a few feet away, turning to watch Sean dismount as well. He reaches into his pocket and gets a handful of salt or sand from it, then drops it in a circle around Corr and spits in it while I watch. Once this is done, he walks over to me, dark and silent, at the festival, and I know I'm looking back. Something wild and old spins inside me, but I don't have any words. Sean reaches out between us and takes my wrist. He presses his thumb on my pulse. My heartbeat trips and surges against his skin. I'm pinned by his touch, a sort of fearful magic. We stand, and I wait for my pulse against his finger to slow, but it doesn't. Finally, he releases my wrist and says, I'll see you on the cliffs tomorrow. Chapter 48. Puck. When I get home, the house is neat as a pin. It hasn't looked like this since our parents died. I stand in the doorway for a moment, lost in wonder and bemusement, and then Finn bursts out in the hallway. He looks like a man who has been on fire and put himself out. He's frazzled, even more than usual. I swim out of my thoughts to try to puzzle what has happened. What's wrong? I ask. Finn tries several times to say something, but only his hands are successful at it. Eventually it manages, I thought something. How would I know if something happened to you? Why would something have happened to me? Puck, it's night. Where have you been? I thought. Slowly it dawns on me. He'd seen me before I left for confession and must have expected me not long after. I'm sorry, Finn, I tell him. Finn storms mightily around the room, and I realize that he's done all this cleaning because he was fretting over me. The house looks amazing, I offer. He snaps. Of course it does. I cleaned the whole bloody thing. I didn't even know how long it would be. If you died before I knew, who'd tell me? I'm sorry. I forgot. Time got away from me. This makes Finn rage even more. I've never seen him in such a state. He's like my father when he found out that my mother had bought a grey gelding off a farmer. He'd raged about a furious silent storm contained by the walls, clutching the backs of chairs and staring at the ceiling until Mum had agreed to sell the gelding. Time got away, Finn says finally. I can say I'm sorry some more, but I don't see what it will do. Not good at all is what it will do. Then what do you want from me? The truth is that I did feel bad before, but now my patience is at a thread. It's not as if I can go and undo the past. Finn leans on the back of my father's armchair, his knuckles white around the top of it. I can't bear it, he says, and I suddenly see Gabe in him. I can't bear not knowing what will happen. I creep around to the armchair and crouch in front of it. I fold my arms on the seat and peer up at his face. I'm not sure why he looks so young, if it's the worry that's taking the age from him, or if it's because I've been looking at Sean Kendrick's face. I say, it's almost over. We'll be okay. Nothing will happen to me. Even if I don't win, we'll be okay, right? Finn's face is bleak and terrible, and I don't think he believes it. I add, Puffin came back, didn't she? Missing half her tail. You don't have a tail to spare. Dove does. And that expensive food means hers grows back fast. I'm not sure if he's comforted, but he doesn't protest further. Later, he drags his mattress into my room and pushes it against the opposite wall. It reminds me strikingly of my childhood, when he and I used to share a room with Gabe, before my father built another room onto the side of our house for him and Mum. After the light is off, we're quiet for several long moments. Then Finn says, What did Father Mooneyham give you? 2 Hail Marys and a Columba. Jesus, said Finn in the dark, you were worse than that. I tried to tell him. I'll tell him again when I go tomorrow. Did you already say them? Of course, it was only 2 Hail Marys and a Columba. Finn rustles in the darkness. Do you still talk in your sleep? I ask. How would I know? I'm going to hit you if you do. Finn turns over again, punching his pillow. This isn't for always, just until after. Okay, I say. Out the window I can see the shape of the moon, and it reminds me of Sean's finger pressed against my wrist. I hold the thought carefully in my head because I want to consider it some more once Finn has stopped speaking. But instead, as I wait for sleep, I find myself thinking about what Finn said about me dying, about how he didn't know how long it would be before he knew or who would tell him. I realize then that I can't remember how it is that we found out that our parents were dead. I just remember them going out to the boat together, a very rare occasion indeed, and then I remember knowing they were dead. Not only can I not see the face of who told us, I can't even remember the telling. I lie there with my eyes tightly closed, trying to bring back the moment back to focus. But all I can call up is Sean's face and the sensation of the ground rushing by beneath Corr. I think that's the mercy of this island, actually, that it won't give us our terrible memories for long, but lets us keep the good ones for as long as we want them. Thank you for joining us for this section of the Scorpio Races. Again, make sure you check the description box underneath the video for your discussion questions for this week. Feel free to use them for discussion with your family or to answer them right there in the comments. Make sure that you log this time for your reading score in our 313 challenge, and we'll see you next time.